Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Kirby Swenson. I will be your instructor for Biology 1001. Welcome to Biology 1001, Chapter 1. Biology is the study of life. Bio means life, ology means to study. For something to be considered to be alive, it has several properties, and the first property that something has to have, or something that alive does have, is order. Life is highly ordered. Life has to be highly ordered. Life is not random. Your body, how many different things can go wrong if it's disordered? And the answer is a million different things can go wrong if it is disordered. Everything has to follow a certain chain of events to keep you alive. That is order. Something we'll talk about much later on is this concept of disorder. But the end of the conversation is that life fights disorder. Life requires order. For living things to stay alive, some of the individuals must reproduce. Life is able to make more of itself. All living things have to reproduce. And let me start over and say that a different way. For a species to stay alive, for a species to remain on the planet, at least some of the individuals have to reproduce. If you went your entire life without ever having a child, would your life be any shorter? Would your life be, would you die if you didn't have kids? And the answer to that is, of course, no, that's not the case. We all know people that lived into their old age without ever having children. So no, an individual does not have to reproduce to continue their life. But the species or a population of individuals must reproduce for that population or for that species to stay on the planet. So life requires reproduction. And most of the time, most individuals will reproduce, but not all will reproduce. Living things grow and develop. What were you the moment your life began? The moment your life began, you were one single cell. You were a very newly fertilized egg. Your father's sperm had just entered your mother's egg. And at that moment, you were one cell. You're not still one cell. How many cells are you? We're not totally sure, but the human body contains about 37.2 trillion cells. 0.2 trillion is 200 billion. So your body is 37 trillion, 200 billion cells. How did you go from being one cell to 37 trillion cells? Those cells grew. And if you were one cell obviously doesn't have a nose, obviously doesn't have ears or arms or legs. How did you go from being one cell to being 37 trillion cells with all these different body features? You developed. Everything that has ever lived grew. It increased either in cell size or cell number. When a cell reproduces, it splits in half. Obviously, if it splits in half, that means that the two cells are half as big as the one cell used to be. When those two cells split, they have to have increased in size before they do so. Otherwise, if they continued to do that, they would have eventually split into nothing. There'd be nothing left to split in half. So everything that's ever lived had to increase in cell size or cell number, and most things increase in both cell size and cell number. Most cells start off small and get larger. Most organisms begin their life as a single cell and then become many cells. Maybe not 37 trillion, maybe more than 37 trillion. But everything that ever lived has grown and reproduced. Anything that lives must process energy. Processing energy, it's kind of a broad term, a broad statement. It means a lot of things. But the end of the story, the boiled down statement is that everything that's alive has to eat. Everything that is alive eats. It consumes energy and uses that energy for, well, the stuff that we've talked about up until now: growth, development, reproduction, and even order, using energy to maintain order. So everything that's alive has to consume energy, has to use energy in one form or another. Um, Everything has to power every living thing. Every living thing has to power their body with energy, and they get that energy from the food that they eat. Everything that's alive must regulate. It must regulate something. For example, in your own body, what are some things that you probably regulate? You regulate your body temperature. That's probably the one that you know best that you regulate. When it's hot, what does your body do? When you're hot, you sweat. That's bringing your temperature down. When you're cold, what do? You shiver. And that's bringing your body temperature up. Body temperature is the one that we're most familiar with. Body temperature is the one that we experience on a day-to-day basis, our body trying to maintain a normal temperature. But there are 1,000 things, 1,000,000 things in your body that you have to maintain, that you have to regulate. Body temperature, blood sugar, a bajillion different hormones, all kinds of things have to be regulated. Every living thing must respond to its environment. Responding to its environment can be one of two things. And an environment can mean outside, like the world, but an environment can also be inside, the internal environment. Everything that's alive must respond to its environment one way or another. One way of responding to your environment that we just talked about was if you are cold, how does your body respond to the environment? It shivers to make heat to warm back up again. That's the external environment. But how do you respond to your internal environment? Well, what do you do when you're hungry? You eat. What do you do? What do you do when you feel the urge to pee? You go find a bathroom. You respond to your internal environment. Everything that's alive must respond to its environment. If you stop responding to your environment, you're not going to be in this world for very much longer. Well, rather, you're not going to be alive for very much longer. Everything that's alive must respond to its environment. And that includes even trees. Trees respond to their environment. One of the things about biology that is challenging is I have to try to make you think of living things as more than just animals. I'll admit I'm an animal guy, which means that's what my focus is on. I prefer to study animals. And even I kind of default to, oh, we're talking about a living process, therefore we're talking about how they work in animals. But that's not always the case. When we talk about these living processes, we need to broaden our definition. And plants. How does a plant respond to its environment? Well, what happens to trees in October? Their leaves change color. What happens to trees every October? They change color. There's all kinds of things. How about do plants flower all the time, or do they just flower at some times of the year? It depends on the plant, but most plants flower only at certain times. How does the plant know it's time to flower? The environment, it sensed something in its environment, and because it said the time was right, it made a change. It responded to its environment. Everything that's alive must adapt to the world around it. And let me start over and say every species must adapt to the environment around it. An individual cannot evolve. An individual cannot adapt. An individual can acclimate. An individual can get used to a new circumstance and a new way of living. But you can't change your genes. And that's what evolution means. Evolution or adaptation means the population used to have this set of genes in this percentage. And now, because of new circumstances, it's gotten hotter, it's gotten colder, it's gotten darker, it's gotten rainier. That population now has a different set of genes and has a different percentage of those genes. All species on the planet have to adapt to their environment. Well, what happens if they don't adapt to their environment? If they don't adapt to their environment, they're not going to be on the planet for very much longer. Only the individuals that survive today can have babies tomorrow. And that's what natural selection is. That's what evolution is. Individuals that have the traits that are best suited to today survive today and have babies tomorrow. And hopefully, whatever traits that individual had that allowed them to survive today, they're going to pass on to their kids. So that if mommy and daddy were able to withstand the temperature today, hopefully baby can withstand the temperature tomorrow.